"Step away from the cabin, sir. You're trespassing." That's what the deputy shouted through a megaphone at me as I stood barefoot on the front porch of my own lake cabin, still holding a mug of coffee in one hand, toothbrush foam clinging to the corner of my mouth. I blinked, unsure if I'd just stepped into some bizarre dream. Another officer stood beside him, fingers hovering a little too close to his holster, if I might lunge at them with a half-sipped coffee and bed hair. 3 squad cars blocked the entrance to the dirt path leading up to the cabin. Red and blue lights spun silently, painting the trees and reflecting in streaks across the still surface of the lake. Behind the line of law enforcement stood a small group of Homeowners Association members, arms crossed, faces stiff with pride. You'd think they were about to take down a wanted fugitive, but the truth, every inch of the land they stood on, the cabin, the lake, the woods, even the gravel beneath their polished shoes belonged to me, legally, fully, without question. And yet, for years, they had treated it like their private sanctuary. They built walking trails, hosted events, put up signs, even issued HOA warnings for trespassing on land they didn't own. The irony was almost funny. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there in my flannel pajamas, toothbrush still bubbling between my lips, as the sheriff stepped toward me with handcuffs at the ready. Because this moment wasn't just about a quiet morning gone sideways. It was the final step in a long battle one they didn't even realize they'd already lost. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. My name's Calvin. I'm 47. A retired electrical engineer from Kansas City. Most of my life was spent in cubicles and server rooms, chasing deadlines and overtime. But a year ago, I left all that behind when I inherited my grandfather's ranch, 70 acres of untouched Texas land. Nestled beside a high-end lakeside neighborhood called Silver Birch Estates. The property had everything: a private lake, towering trees, open pastures, a one-room cabin my grandfather built with his own hands in 1962. It was rustic, peaceful, and exactly what I needed after decades of hustle. I didn't even plan to live there full-time. At first, just wanted to fix it up, catch some redfish, do a little woodworking, and enjoy life at a slower pace. But peace, it turned out, wasn't something the HOA was willing to offer. From the moment I started making improvements, they descended like a swarm of bureaucratic wasps. I wasn't part of their association, I lived outside of it. Literally across the legal boundary line, but that didn't stop them. I got notices taped to trees, warnings for unauthorized structures when I built a dock, letters accusing me of violating community landscaping codes, even though I didn't live in their community. And every step of the way, they acted like they were the rightful owners, like my grandfather's land had just become a natural extension of their domain. Turns out, years ago, without anyone noticing, the HOA had quietly started using the edge of my property as if it were theirs maintaining. Trails, clearing brush, hosting events, and the neighborhood simply followed along. For a while, I ignored them. I just wanted to fish, build, and be left alone. But one day, I came down to the lake and found a full-blown HOA picnic setup, tents, coolers, kids swimming, speakers blaring music on my dock. No one asked permission. No one even acknowledged me. That's when something in me snapped. That day, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to reclaim my land. I was going to make sure every last person in that HOA understood exactly where their boundary ended and mine began. And that's how we got to the porch, the cops, the handcuffs. But I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. While they spent years thinking they were in control, I'd been quietly gathering every deed, document, survey, and legal record I could find. I traced old property lines, hired my own surveyor, verified every inch of my inheritance, and now I had everything I needed to take it all back and more. So, as the sheriff stood there, cuffs gleaming in the sun, and the HOA members smirked behind him, I took one final sip of coffee, set the mug down on the railing, and smiled. "Sure, officer," I said. But before you make a mistake, you'll regret. You might want to take a look at this, and that's when everything changed. Sure, here's a rewritten version of your story without commas and without using strike-throughs. I've smoothed the flow for readability while keeping the tone and style intact. Want to know how wild things got for me? Let me introduce the folks who turned my peaceful retirement into a full-blown nightmare. First, there's Rhonda Miles, the HOA president. Late 50s, always wearing her sun hat like it was a crown, and talking with a voice that could wake the dead. She smiled while handing out fines like it was her favorite hobby. She treated Silver Birch Estates like it was Buckingham Palace. Rhonda didn't just enforce rules, she invented them. Every other week a new sign would pop up or some new threat of a violation would be posted. Then there's Dennis, her husband. Always in a tucked polo, acting like a mall cop on high alert. He wasn't even on the HOA board, but that didn't stop him from patrolling the neighborhood with a walkie-talkie like he was guarding top-secret government files. He once threatened a teenager for sitting on the curb too long. Next up was Tiffany Stone, the neighborhood gossip queen. Early 30s, always pushing a dog stroller with a phone glued to her hand, recording everything that moved. She smiled at you like a friend, then ran straight to the HOA group chat to report your fence height. She once called the police on a kid for skateboarding near her mailbox. They were the unholy trinity of Silver Birch. At first, I didn't pay them much mind. My land was separated from the neighborhood by a row of tall pine trees and an old wooden fence. The cabin sat right next to the lake, which stretched between my land and theirs. I figured we'd all just mind our own business. I was wrong. First red flag came one morning when I saw a man in a kayak paddling through the water on my side of the lake. He was wearing a Silver Birch hoodie. I waved and said, "Nice morning." He looked startled, nodded, and turned his kayak around like he'd been caught stealing fish. A few days later, I walked down to my shoreline and found two families having a full-on barbecue. Folding chairs out, music playing, coolers set up like they were tailgating. I said, "Hey, sorry, but this is private property." One guy looked confused. Ann said, "This is the HOA lake." Rhonda said it was for all Silver Birch residents. I blinked. Well, this side of the lake isn't even in their community. It's part of my ranch. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. That's when I started digging. I pulled out my grandpa's old deed maps and boundary papers. Sure enough, the lake, the shoreline, and the cabin were fully on my family's land. Always had been. But somehow, over the years, the HOA had started treating it like their backyard. They put up benches, held picnics, installed trash cans, and even nailed up a sign that read, "Silver Birch, HOA, dock," right on my side of the lake. At first I thought maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe someone down the line misunderstood the property lines. I decided to be nice, sent Rhonda a letter, friendly tone. Even attached the maps showing the boundary lines. Said I wasn't trying to stir up anything, but I'd appreciate it if people stopped using the lakefront without permission. No response. 3 days later, a new wooden sign appeared. It read, "Private Community Lakefront HOA Members Only. Trespassers will be reported." I almost choked on my morning coffee. Not only were they trespassing, they were doubling down. Still, I kept my cool. I called the county, checked records again, verified everything. That lake wasn't even a natural lake. It was a man-made retention pond created when my grandpa dammed a creek in the 60s. I could have taken legal action right then, but I had a better idea. I cleaned up the cabin, replaced the old shutters, swept the porch, stocked it with food and water. Then one Friday, I packed a bag, loaded my canoe, and paddled across the lake to my own cabin for a peaceful weekend of fishing and relaxation. That night was perfect. The wind rustled through the trees, frogs chirped near the shoreline, and the stars slowly lit up the sky above the roof of that old cabin. Then came the morning knock. I opened the door in pajamas, coffee in hand, and toothbrush still in my mouth. There stood Dennis with his walkie-talkie and that smug expression he always wore. "You can't be here," he said. "You're trespassing on HOA land." I raised an eyebrow. "This is my land." "Okay, actually," he said, pulling out a folded HOA map, "this entire area falls under Silver Birch jurisdiction. You're camping illegally." I laughed. "My grandpa built this place. This is our family's property. You've got 5 minutes to pack up and leave," he said before turning around and radioing someone. 15 minutes later, the police showed up, and that brings us back to the start. 3 squad cars parked by the trail, lights flashing across the surface of the lake. Me, slippers and flannel pajamas, holding a coffee mug, and Rhonda standing behind the deputies like she was royalty. "You need to vacate the property," the officer said. I said, "I own this land. This is my ranch. I've got all the records. Do you have proof with you, sir?" "At home," I said. "But more importantly, this cabin isn't in your community?" Rhonda stepped forward. "That's not true. The lake was deeded to the HOA when the development was built. We maintain it." I looked over and spotted Tiffany behind a tree, whispering into her phone while filming me like I was an episode of Cops. The deputy said, "Until we sort this out, we need you to step off the property. We'll handle it with the county Monday." I took a breath. I knew this wasn't over. Then something buzzed in the sky. A drone, silver casing, hovering right above the cabin. Everyone looked up. Rhonda's face went pale, because the drone camera showed everything: the cabin, the shoreline, and right there in the middle of the trees, a full-size boundary marker I had installed the night before. Bright lettering, clear lines, a sign that read "Private Ranch Entry by Permission Only." The drone panned slowly across the lake, revealing the dock labeled HOA property that sat clearly on. First, there was Rhonda Miles, the HOA president. Late 50s, always wore her sun hat like it was a crown, and had a voice like a smoke alarm. The kind of person who smiled while handing out fines. She treated Silver Birch Estates like it was Buckingham Palace. Rhonda didn't just enforce rules, she created them. Every other week, there would be a new sign or some new violation notice on someone's mailbox. Then came Dennis, her husband. He wore tucked polo shirts with jeans and strutted around like a mall cop on steroids. He wasn't even on the HOA board, but he acted like he was guarding a top-secret facility, always with a walkie-talkie, always peeking over fences like he was on patrol. Next up was Tiffany Stone, the gossip queen, early 30s. Always walking her dog in a stroller and recording everything on her phone. She would smile to your face and report you to the HOA the moment you turned your back. She once called the police on a kid for skateboarding near her mailbox. She lived for drama, and the group chat was her stage. They were the unholy trinity of Silver Birch. At first, I ignored them. My land was separated from the neighborhood by a row of tall pine trees and an old wooden fence. The cabin sat right on the lake, which stretched between my land and theirs. I figured we'd all just mind our business and keep to our sides. But I was wrong one morning. I walked down to the lake and saw a man in a Silver Birch hoodie kayaking across my side of the water. I waved and said good morning. He looked startled, nodded quickly, and turned around like he'd been caught stealing a few days later. I found 2 families having a full-on barbecue on my shoreline. They had folding chairs, coolers, music, and a whole picnic set. "Up," I told them politely. "This is private property." One of the guys flipped a burger and said, "This is the HOA lake. Rhonda told us it's for everyone." I blinked. "This side of the lake isn't even in the HOA. It's part of my ranch." He looked at me like I was crazy. That's when I started digging through old documents. I pulled out my grandpa's deed maps and boundary papers. Sure enough, the entire lake, the shoreline, and the cabin were all on my family's land, always had been, but somehow, over the years, the HOA had started claiming the lake like it was theirs. They built benches, set up picnic tables, and even nailed a wooden sign that read, "Silver Birch, HOA Dock," right on my side. At first I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone down the line got confused. So I stayed calm and sent Rhonda a letter, friendly, respectful. I even attached scanned copies of the maps, showing the boundaries, I said. I wasn't trying to start any trouble, but this was private land, and I'd appreciate it if residents stopped crossing over without permission. No response. Instead, 3 days later, I found a brand new wooden sign. It said, "Private Community Lakefront HOA members only. Trespassers will be reported." That nearly made me spit out my morning coffee. Not only were they trespassing, they were doubling down still. I didn't lose it. I called the county, checked the parcel maps again. Everything was clear. The lake was a man-made retention basin created decades ago when my grandpa dammed a small creek. It wasn't public water. It wasn't HOA property. It was mine. I could have gone to court, filed a lawsuit. But I wanted to handle it another way. I cleaned up the cabin, repainted the shutters, swept the porch, stocked it with supplies. Then one Friday, I packed a bag, loaded my canoe, and paddled across the lake to spend the weekend relaxing on my own land. That first night was pure peace. The frogs chirped, the wind whispered through the trees, and stars spread like diamonds above the cabin roof. Then the knock came. I opened the door in my flannel pajamas, coffee in one hand, toothbrush still foaming in my mouth. It was Dennis, walkie-talkie in hand, grinning like he just caught an escaped convict. "You can't be here," he said. "You're trespassing on HOA land." I raised an eyebrow. "This is my land." "Actually," he said, pulling out a folded HOA map, "this area is under Silver Birch jurisdiction. You're camping illegally." I laughed, "Buddy, my grandpa built this cabin. This has always been private family land. You've got 5 minutes to leave," he said, and started radioing someone. 15 minutes later, the police showed up. And that brings us back to the beginning. 3 squad cars parked on the dirt path, lights flashing. Across the lake, me standing barefoot on the porch of my own cabin in pajamas, and Rhonda behind the cops like she was leading a royal procession. "You need to vacate the property," one deputy said. I said calmly, "I own this land. This is my ranch. I've got the records to prove it." "Do you have those records with you, sir?" "No, but they're at my house 10 minutes away." Rhonda stepped forward. "That's not true. The lake was deeded to the HOA when the development was built. We've maintained it ever since." From behind a tree, I spotted Tiffany whispering into her phone, filming the whole scene like it was reality TV. The deputy said, "Until we verify this, we need you to step off the property. We'll sort it out through the county on Monday." I took a breath. I knew this was going to get messy. Then something buzzed in the sky. A silver drone. It hovered right above the cabin. Rhonda looked up, and her face dropped because the drone camera wasn't just seeing the cabin, it was seeing the full-size boundary marker I had installed the night before, clear as day. It read, "Private ranch entry by permission only." The drone slowly turned and caught the HOA dock built right on my land. The truth was in the sky, and the battle had just begun. After he left, I sat back down in the porch chair, still wide awake as the stars blinked above the lake. My mind kept circling one thought: who did it? And then I remembered something. The fabric inside the metal box, the one with our family crest. It wasn't just cloth. It was a patch from Grandpa's original land scouting jacket, and underneath it there had been something else I didn't examine fully. I went back inside, careful not to disturb the glass, and reopened the box. Beneath the lining was a hidden compartment. I peeled it open and found an envelope marked, "Do not open unless they try to take it from you." Inside were 3 things. A set of photographs, old yellowed, showing my grandfather shaking hands with a man wearing a suit labeled District Surveyor 1967. A letter from the surveyor confirming that Whitley Ranch extended to the southern ridge line, including the eastern pond, which shall remain in the Whitley family in perpetuity. A cassette tape. Yes, a tape. Grandpa never trusted modern tech. I stared at it for a long time. The next morning, I borrowed a player from town and played it inside the cabin. My grandfather's voice crackled through. "If you're hearing this, boy, then they've gone too far. Maybe it's developers, maybe politicians. I told you, this land has value. They'll try to wrap it in ribbon and paperwork, but don't be fooled. The ground under your feet, we bled for it. They paved over the truth, but it's still under there. You hold the records. You hold the truth. Don't let them take what's ours. I sat there, tears prickling in my eyes, gripping that old tape deck like it was gold. My phone buzzed. It was Jessica Monroe, the reporter who'd interviewed me. "I thought you'd want to know," she said, voice sharp. "Someone just leaked an anonymous tip to the paper." "What kind of tip?" I asked. "They claim you forged the deed to your land, that you're an imposter squatting on public property." My mouth dropped open. "What?" It came with a fake screenshot of a title document, doctored but very convincing. My editor almost ran the story, but I checked the metadata. The file was made on Tiffany Stone's device. I stood up so fast, the chair behind me fell backward. Jessica continued, "We won't publish it. I'm printing your side tomorrow morning. But Calvin, someone is trying to destroy your reputation." I clenched my jaw. Let them try, but inside I knew I had to move fast. Rhonda and her circle weren't just playing dirty, they were playing dangerous. I needed help. That afternoon, I posted on the Silver Birch Community Forum, the one they tried to ban me from weeks ago. "You've heard rumors, you've heard lies. Now hear the truth. My name is Calvin Whitley. This ranch has belonged to my family for over 60 years. What the HOA is doing is wrong. I invite any resident who wants to know the real story to visit the cabin tomorrow at noon. You'll see the documents yourself. You'll see what they've done, and you'll decide for yourself." I didn't expect much, but the next day, over 30 people showed up. Some came in shame, some came in curiosity, a few brought cookies. One man said, "I've lived here 10 years, never knew this was all yours. I just thought the HOA handled everything. I laid out the documents, the tapes, even the photos. Let them see it with their own eyes." And then right in the middle of the presentation, Dennis came storming down the hill. "You don't get to hold court here," he bellowed. "You're poisoning the community with your lies." A few people stepped back, but this time I stepped forward. "Tell me something, Dennis," I said. "Did you throw that brick?" He froze. "You were parked across the street when we filed the report," I continued, "and you've been trailing me ever since." "You don't have proof," he hissed. "Maybe not yet," I said, "but you know what I do have." I turned to the crowd, a security camera. Gasps. All around, Dennis's eyes went wide. "You see," I added, "I installed a trail camera on the path behind the cabin, the same one someone used to sneak around and throw a brick through a 70-year-old window." He backed away slowly, and then he ran straight up the trail. Someone shouted, "He's running!" And just as two younger residents sprinted after him, Mr. Fisher pulled up in his car, waving a manila folder. "Calvin," he called out, "the county just sent confirmation, the fraudulent land claim officially revoked." Cheers erupted around me. People clapped, some hugged me, and others shook their heads in disbelief, but I didn't cheer. I watched the trail where Dennis disappeared, because just as the joy started to settle in my chest, one of the residents ran back down the path, out of breath. "Mr. Whitley, sir, you need to come quick." I stood up. "What is it?" "It's your barn," he panted. "It's on fire." Smoke twisted into the sky like a black serpent. I drove across the pasture like a madman, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the engine. From halfway down the trail, I could already see it. Orange flames licking out of the old barn's windows, the roof collapsing inward as the structure gasped its last breath. That barn had stood for over 70 years. It had weathered storms, droughts, and time itself, but it couldn't survive this. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the truck. A few neighbors were already there trying to beat back the flames with garden hoses and shovels, but it was no use. The fire was too far gone. My hands shook as I watched beams fall in slow motion one by one. I felt like I was watching my grandfather die all over again. Sheriff Clay pulled up next, siren, silent but lights flashing. "You okay, Calvin?" I nodded stiffly, my throat too tight to speak. "We already called the fire department, but out here, they're slow," he muttered. "This was no accident." He turned to me with a grim face. "We found a smashed gas can near the south wall. Trail of accelerant leads from the tree line. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." I looked toward the tree's jaw tight. Dennis, Sheriff Clay, didn't flinch. "We'll be pulling security footage from your cabin cam. You said it caught the back trail, every angle," I said. "I made sure of it." By the time the flames died and the barn was reduced to smoking embers, the fire department had arrived. But all they could do was prevent it from spreading to the cabin. I stood in silence, staring at the ash. My grandpa's saddle was in there. His wood tools, old farming journals, everything gone. Rhonda had tried paperwork. Dennis had used violence. Now they'd taken something irreplaceable, but they'd also made a mistake because the sheriff reviewed the footage from my trail cam that same evening, and there he was, clear as day. Dennis Miles, hood up, crouched low, pouring gasoline around the barn in the dead of night. He lit a match, then ran. That was all we needed. By morning, a warrant had been issued, and by noon, Dennis was arrested at the Silver Birch HOA office. While trying to shred documents, Rhonda wasn't there. She was already gone. Skipped town the moment she realized Dennis was caught. The community was in chaos. Silver Birch residents demanded a full audit of the HOA's finances. Turns out, Rhonda had also been siphoning dues to fund her brother's fake real estate firm, Miles Holdings LLC. Everything came crashing down. And as for me, I didn't let it break me. The barn was gone, but not my legacy, not the truth, not my roots. Jessica Monroe from the paper came back for a follow-up interview. The headline this time read, "HOA Scandal Local Rancher Exposes Years of Fraud and Arson in Landmark Legal Victory." In the photo, I stood in front of the charred remains of the barn, holding my grandfather's flag patch that survived the fire inside a sealed metal box. The community rallied behind me. One by one, they came forward. Rachel and her husband from Lot 6 offered to rebuild the barn themselves with help from other residents. The local church donated tools and supplies. One man who used to side with Rhonda said, "You taught us something, Mr. Whitley. That land means nothing without heart, and you've got more of that than all of us combined." Even the sheriff came back out one evening, sitting beside me by the water. "Place feels peaceful again," he said. "It's not over," I told him. "Not until I make sure this never happens to someone else." And I meant it because I started something after that. A new sign went up by the lake. "Whitley Ranch open to honest folks. Closed to greed." I held workshops about land rights, helped neighbors fight wrongful HOA fines, even got invited to speak at a county hearing about abuse of power and homeowner associations. The people listened because they saw what happened when one man, just one, refused to be pushed off his family's land. And Rhonda, they caught her 3 weeks later in Arizona, hiding out under her maiden name. She was charged with fraud, trespassing, conspiracy to commit arson, and obstruction of justice. Her HOA empire gone burnt to ash, just like the barn she helped destroy. But the ranch still here, still standing. And me, I rebuilt the barn stronger, better, with help, with love, with community. Because sometimes when you stand your ground, you don't just protect the past, you shape the future. So, to everyone watching, let me ask you, have you ever been bullied by an HOA, or had your rights pushed aside because someone thought their title made them more important? Let me know in the comments. And if this story reminded you of the power of standing up for what's right, like, share, subscribe, because your voice, it matters. And maybe the next time someone tries to erase your history, you'll remember the man who wouldn't move from his porch even when the cops came knocking.